This is News Conference Extra with Conan Nolan.
Good morning and welcome to News Conference Extra, a special segment of Today in LA Weekend. There were historic job numbers this week, 157,000 new jobs in July over the previous month, the lowest unemployment numbers in decades. But despite that, the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates. And was that a move designed to give President Trump some cover now that he plans on another $300 billion worth of tariffs on goods coming from China? Joining us from Sacramento is Jockl O'Connell, international economist with the Los Angeles-based Beacon Economics. Jock, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Conan. Glad to be here.
First off, so that people understand, California, particularly Southern California, has more skin in the game when it comes to trade with China than any other region of the nation, correct?
That's absolutely true. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach handle slightly more than 50% of all containerized trade between the United States and China. The next closest port complex in the country, the ports of New York, New Jersey, handle about 11%. So clearly, the ports of LA and Long Beach are at the front lines of the trade conflict between the United States and China.
And there's a whole economic infrastructure in Southern California related to the ports in terms of transportation, warehouse jobs.
There's literally an army of people in Southern California whose jobs are directly tied to the movement of containers through the ports of LA and Long Beach. Start with the railroad workers and the truck drivers who move containers in and out of the ports, particularly in the Inland Empire counties of Riverside and San Bernardino, who work in warehouses and distribution centers that process the goods that are coming in or going out of the ports. These are often temporary workers on call if there are fewer boxes to be managed, fewer job opportunities, fewer people get called into work. And to a large extent, these tend to be some of the most economically vulnerable people in our society.
Has there been an impact thus far, prior to what happened this week, with regard to the trade war with China?
Yes, we've seen a diminution in the volume of trade with China. The activity through the ports has been down. Likewise, the volume of exports and imports moving through Los Angeles International, San Francisco International has declined. Less revenue in the case of the Southern California ports means that they have less money to invest in the kinds of zero-emission equipment needed to process containerized goods. The kinds of goods that are being required of them by air quality regulators in order to lessen the carbon footprint of the ports. So in all of this is an environmental consequence as well.
So when the president said on Friday, listen, it's 10%, I'm hiking it up 10% on $300 billion worth of goods, could hike it up even more to 25%. At what point does it hit consumers? 10%
tariffs are fairly easy for importers to finesse. You can get your supplier to cut costs, to cut the prices that they're charging you. You can absorb some of it yourself. You don't necessarily have to disturb your market by passing all of the cost on. But when you start ratcheting tariffs up to 25%, it's an entirely different ballgame, and consumers will feel the burden. But you know, the products that are now being that will be subject to tariff as of September 1st include a vast number of consumer goods that have up to now been spared from tariffs. So you're talking about toys. You're talking about putting a 10% tariff on toys in the run-up to Christmas. It would be flippant to say that the administration is declaring a war on Christmas, but you have to worry about this. These are costs of items that you will go into the store and buy and might very quickly see price increases going into effect.
Why did the Federal Reserve lower interest rates if the economy is doing so well? Normally, just the opposite happens because you don't want an overheated economy and too much inflation.
Clearly, the president has been bringing a lot of pressure on Fed Chairman Powell to lower interest rates in order to stimulate economic growth. What's interesting, though, is that in the press conference after announcing the 0.25% decline in interest rates, the chairman said, or we referenced trade. Historically, the Fed has not paid explicit attention to America's trade relations, but this is an indication, I think, of the Fed's growing awareness, perhaps belatedly so, that the modern U.S. economy is structured around a number of very complex supply chains that reach out around the world. And that quite apart from the import-export numbers, the real cost of a trade war is in terms of the disruption to these supply chains.
Finally, the individual who used to be governor in your city, Jerry Brown, would talk routinely at his budget meetings about the fact that there's going to be a recession at some point. There always is. The economy is cyclical. We've gone years without one, well over a decade now. Is there a sense, do you have a sense that the Fed and others are trying to look down the road? It's impossible to predict exactly when one's going to happen, but it's an inevitability.
I think you're right. It's inevitable that we will encounter a recession. The real question is how steep will the recession be and how quickly we will be able to recover from it. And this all goes back to having sound economic and fiscal policies. That's the danger. We're not seeing a lot of sound economic and fiscal policy making right now.
Jockl O'Connell from Beacon Economics up in Sacramento, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome, Conan. Bye-bye.
NBC4's news conference program is preempted by NBC Sports this week. We will be back next week at that time, 9 o'clock on Sunday. We will see you then. Have a great Sunday.